Mr. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like permission to insert my printed statement in the record.
Without objection, the full statement of all the witnesses will be.
Along with a statement from the Liberty Study Committee. Unanimous consent to put that in the record as well. I, too, am grateful that you're holding these hearings because I think privacy is a very important issue, and that we are going to hear more and more of it. I think it came to the attention of the public and to many in our regulatory bodies when Know Your Customer regulations were proposed a year or so ago, and with a little bit of encouragement, there were over 500,000 comments sent to the Federal Reserve and the FDIC because these were regulations that were way overstepping and ignoring the privacy of the individual. I take a little different approach to the issue of privacy than others, but I think that there is a common thread among us that the solution is going to be found somewhere in dealing with the Social Security number, and for that reason I am encouraged. In 1970 we had the Privacy Act, 1974, the Privacy Act was written to combat some of the things the Bank Secrecy Act did in 1970. And the Privacy Act was designed to say you cannot use the Social Security number as an identifier. But then, like so often in our legislation later on in the bill, it said, but Congress can make use of the Social Security number anytime they want. And we certainly have been doing that since then. And I think that is where the serious problem is. But where I disagree with some of my friends who will write more legislation, I think there's a certain part of privacy that should be dealt with in the marketplace. For instance, I don't believe that Congress should write a law compelling the Sierra Club and the ACLU to deal with their memberships and say, have them fill out a form and get permission before they can rent lists or do anything, because the more information they collect, the more likely it is that information will go to the government and then abused by possibly their political enemies. So I'm not in favor of more regulations. For instance, the bank bill that we passed last year said that the bank would have to ask questions about privacy. Again, accumulation of more material. The real problem I see is the Social Security number, the universal identifier. It is true, in the old days, medical privacy was taken care of much better. But now that we have government-mandated health care programs and health management, yes, it's convenient. It's convenient for government to be more efficient. But the question is, do we want to weigh the two? Can you always argue the case for efficient government, at the same time protect privacy? I think there's a conflict there, but our goal should be the privacy. The goal of privacy should override the efficiency of government, and I think that sometimes is where we slip on this. And just providing new rules, I think, can be very, very damaging to us, and that we shouldn't just ask the government or ask these organizations to provide more forms to fill out, because that invites abuse. My bill, H.R. 220, addresses this, and this is where I'm hoping more of us can come together. And it does more or less state what the law in 1974 stated, but it has the force of law, that you cannot use the Social Security number as a universal identifier. It wasn't intended. We never even used Social Security numbers on our tax forms till the early 1960s, and there's no reason that we can't pass something like this if we're concerned about identity theft. The best thing we can do for those who steal identities is to have all our information brought together by the universal identifier. So the most important thing that we could do to stop identity theft is to make sure that there's a law in the books, that we live by it, and that we do not have a universal identifier. It will be this, and is, the Social Security number. It is universal. I delivered babies in my professional life, and it is true, in the last several years we were required. Everybody was getting Social Security numbers before the baby left the hospital. Everybody wants to know everything about everything, and the most important way they accumulate this information and can find out information on us is the Social Security number. So if it makes government a little less efficient, I think that might have to come about. I do not believe you can demand the efficiency that some people would like on government programs, at the same time say that we will protect our privacy. There will have to be a choice. Of course, my choice is for privacy, and my choice, of course, would be to pass H.R. 220, and there could be no universal identifier for any of our programs. And I thank the chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. I just have a couple questions that I'd like to direct, one to Mr. Kletzka and one to Mr. Paul. Some of the witnesses on the next panel will testify that restricting the commercial use of Social Security numbers will seriously impede their ability to do business. They will testify that such restrictions will harm consumers because Social Security number is often used for law enforcement, fraud prevention, and to provide services which consumers value. How would you respond to these criticisms, and how does your bill ensure that consumers are not harmed by Social Security number restrictions?
Well, Mr. Chairman, first of all, I don't believe there's any basis for indicating that this will impede anyone's ability to do business. We found in a GAO report that credit bureaus make tens of millions of dollars annually by selling credit header information which contains a Social Security number. What it's going to harm is their ability to increase the bottom line. And so my response to that argument would be, you can still check a consumer or a credit file for accuracy in name, address, phone number, and past addresses. If that matches with the request that has just come in for a credit rating, you will still sell that information and send it on down. By virtue of the fact that you're using it as a national ID number, which it was never intended to do, and no one in this room or no member of Congress will agree to that usage, I'm saying is not something that, that we should try to maintain for their business purposes. In fact, the big harm to the consumers, Mr. Chairman, will be if Congress fails to do anything.
Okay, thank you for that. And my next question is directed to Mr. Paul. The American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, they will testify later on that your bill, H.R. 220, will negatively impact on the ability of states to combat fraud and ensure public safety. Would you like to respond to that criticism?
Well, I think the opposite would be true if you're interested in stopping the fraud of identity theft. Since the Social Security number being used as a universal identifier enhances the identity theft, I would say we would go a long way to stopping that. I guess what they're referring to is the possibility of putting an ID or the Social Security number on our driver's licenses. And that has been started, and that, of course, is what the individuals who like the national ID card would like. And even though I don't happen to believe it would impede the ability to combat fraud because it would circumvent or stop the identity theft, I would be quite willing to say even if there was the slightest benefit, it's still so dangerous to use a universal identifier that our freedoms and our liberties and our privacies, I mean, if we had armed guards every place, of course there may be less fraud and less theft, but we would be living in a police state. So there's an extreme there. So this is just the introduction of the heavy hand of government monitoring us. And therefore, even if there can be a slight justification, I don't think it should be accepted. I don't believe that is the case because I think it would be a tremendous benefit to stop the identity theft.
Mr. Markey?
Can I very briefly just say that I do agree with Representative Paul that we have to be very concerned about government misuse of private information within our society. But the big problem today is not Big Brother, it's Big Browser. It's the ability not only for the government, but for private sector companies to gather all this information, which would never have been able to be compiled before. And while some industries say, well, you know, you're going to interfere with this revolution. And I think that's the greatest fear which we all have. Well, who would want to be somebody that's given responsibility for ending the internet revolution? Huh? As though by animating this revolution with all values, you are now going to ruin it. My God, just think if internet stocks had to be valued on the same basis as the old economy stocks. You know, they might go down a couple of thousand points. You know, that'd be terrible if they had to actually have profits, have a cash flow. You can't value stocks that way, they say. You're foolish. You know, are we going to prohibit fraud online? No, that would, under their argument, no, that would actually interfere with their ability to get this thing going. But right now, we have rules that say that you can't transfer, as a tax preparer, somebody's private tax information without their permission. That you can't transfer driver license information without their permission. Because of Judge Bork, it's illegal to transfer any information about any video cassettes which you rent at a video store. It doesn't ruin their business, but it allows you to protect the information about the movies that you rented. No cable company can sell the information about which channels you watch and for how long and what time in the middle of the night you might have flipped to that station. And when watching that movie while everybody was upstairs asleep, they can't sell that information as to what you were watching to anybody. People can't sell your telephone numbers at the phone company, even though it would make a lot of money for them. The cell phone industry can't use their cell phone as a tracker to sell to people as to where you go. That's illegal. Now, again, it limits these industries, but it gives us some additional sense of privacy. And all we're saying about the Social Security number is that it falls into a category which deserves special protection, not only from the government, but also from any industry as well that sees us as nothing more than a product.
If I am reading this panel right, I find Mr. Markey and Mr. Paul agreeing with each other.
When the liberal left and the libertarian right join up, it doesn't leave a lot of room in the middle to find a compromise. I think we're pretty much in agreement in terms of what has to happen in our country.
Well, we'll have to put this down as a red letter day.